jump in to start with. Uh, so one of the big issues that's been going on for years, and people are still upset about, was inflation, right? And so after COVID, when things kind of started to get better, you saw mass inflation. Part of that was a supply chain issue initially, is because these people weren't working, things weren't moving, and if goods don't move, they can't sell, right? It's like a boat that doesn't move is basically just pretending to be an apartment. It's not really a boat anymore. It loses its purpose. So some of that was what was going on. So there was a demand issue where people are coming back, buying stuff, going back to work, and a lot of these products can't get to where they're going because they've been stuck forever. And that's part of how the way things work in the capitalist system. You don't want to spend to move stuff if you're not going to be able to sell it, right? Because then you're just warehousing it and spending more money. So,
Right. Need to store crap.
yeah. Yeah, and stores don't want to keep a lot of stuff in their warehouse that they're going to maybe potentially, especially perishable things, they might have to throw away. So that was part of what drove it. But then after that, demand kept up, and corporations figured out, oh, well, we can keep jacking up the price, and people will buy it because people are finally out, and demand is way up, and inflation skyrocketed to 9%. Um, I mean, it started when Biden got into office, it was 6, and then it got to 9 pretty quick, and then it's come down ever since then. And then, like we said, last month it's the lowest it's been since 2021. So things are looking more like normal now. But part of the problem was that was the price gouging. We can keep jacking up the price of things, and people will pay it. So to prevent that from going forward, Harris has put out an idea of why don't we start and let's put a cap on price gouging, how much you can raise prices just legally. So we'll jump into this real quick. So here's an article from Politico. It's a little small, huh? Let me.
Yeah, it's a little small. Maybe make it just a little bigger.
Yeah. So Trump. So Trump blasts Harris' plan to ban price gouging as communism. Everything's communism with them. So whenever they say that, it just means it's a good idea. Anything they don't like is communism. That's all it is. They don't even, Trump doesn't even know what communism is. Okay, but GOP states already blocked some price hikes. So this is not new. 37 states have laws to address price gouging. I mean, we've seen this before. You can't raise. We've covered this. You can't raise rent by certain amounts, and that's in every state. So basically, the idea. So this is. We'll just go through this article. So President Trump, former President Trump, sorry, is attacking VP Harris. Her plan for a federal ban on price gouging by grocery stores and food suppliers is Soviet-style controls. I don't know what that is. But Republican state officials across the country have embraced the idea of capping excessive prices for years. GOP state attorneys general, as well as many of their Democratic counterparts, have moved to stop companies from charging what they view as exorbitant increases in the cost of some goods in certain circumstances. In Texas, Attorney General Ken Paxton, a Republican, sued a large egg supplier for raising prices about 300% at the height of the pandemic. Wow, that's pretty cold-blooded. Chris Kobach, the Republican Attorney General of Kansas, is suing a large natural gas supplier over allegations it gouged consumers in the aftermath of a 2021 winter storm. And in storm-prone Florida, state officials widely publicized a law that prohibits sharp price increases in essential items during emergencies. So nobody likes to be gouged when they've lost their roof. Yeah, of course. So essentially what they're talking about is this. I'm a company in whatever state, Oregon, right? And I produce 60% of, like in this case, the eggs that get consumed locally. You know, or some large number, 20% even is a large number. But let's say it's 60%. So there's some crisis or whatnot. People can't afford things, or there's some sort of natural disaster, and people need to go out and buy food, and they want to buy eggs. Well, if there's some disaster or some problem, it's unlikely my competitors can ship anything in, which means I now have a short-term monopoly. So while it's tempting for me to sit there and go, well, I'm just going to raise the price of eggs to whatever, ultra maximize my profits and get rich. But what I'm doing to do that is
Right.
I'm taking advantage of poor people who desperately need food,
Right.
right? And middle class people who need food because they're getting through a tragedy. So that's what happened sort of after the pandemic. It was that kind of thing. We'll get into a little bit more of it here in a second. But that's essentially what they're talking about. Well, what's happened is a lot of these states and Republican attorneys generals and Democratic attorneys general have basically said, well, no, we're suing you. You can't do that. Why? Because it's a monopoly. It's a violation of antitrust. Which I think is funny because Republicans always fight antitrust. And it's like, well, no, that's why we have it. So you can't have monopolies. Because then you can rip off the people. It's devastating for an economy if somebody has a monopoly because they can do whatever they want.
Sure, you've got people paying $12 for a dozen eggs or something crazy like that, you
Yeah.
know, and nothing they can do about it.
Yeah. So that's kind of what's going on. But Trump's trying to spin it as, oh, this is communism. It's going to destroy the economy. No, it's going to prevent companies from taking advantage of or monopolizing a situation, which is the whole point. If you
Right.
understood this, is capitalism. Capitalism, the concept, it doesn't work, but the idea is that you'd have competitors. That way, I'd want to keep the prices low so I can sell. Because if I put my prices too high, you're going to go, well, screw it. I'm not going to buy from Dunkin'. I'm going to go buy from this other guy who's selling the same basic product for a lot lower price, right? So that's the idea with capitalism is the prices are sort of kept low by the fact that I have to compete with other people. But if I've got a monopoly and it's just me, I have all control over it. You have to pay whatever price I set. Otherwise, you can't get it. So that's the problem. And the problem's happened with capitalism. This is sort of what's always been predicted is you get too many of these large companies, and what do? They buy up all these other companies. So now they have monopolies. Or pretty close to monopolies. Or what you do have is a lot like, okay, we have 5 or 6 big companies that basically control that market, and they just work together as sister companies so that they don't cannibalize each other. But then they can then jack up prices to control things. So they have that's more what's called an oligarchy kind of system, right? Where you have multiple people sort of colluding. But that happens right now, and this makes a lot of sense as a sort of an antitrust kind of light kind of deal, where it's like, well, yeah, let's just say, look, if you jack up the price more than X amount a year, right? You can't do that, and then the state can sue you and pull back all your profits. But the feds can sue you and pull back all your profits. It's a good idea. Because if you're talking about, well, we're going to raise the price of eggs 300% in a month. It's like, okay, you can't do more than 25% in a year or something. I mean,
Well, and again, this is really not that new of a concept. That's exactly what's happened with prices. You know, I remember in the state of Oregon, in the Portland metropolitan area, there was an era in time when people were having rent jumps by like freaking $800. Like
yeah,
suddenly
50%.
their rent up. I was hearing so many crazy stories about that. Um, when normal rent increases are like $100 or less usually, you know,
Right.
and the government intervened
Yep.
because it was creating disaster, and they essentially put a cap on how much landlords can raise the rent on an annual basis. It's capped to a certain percentage.
Right.
And so this is not a new concept, is the point. We accept that this is normal in terms of rent, but you know, now Republicans are wanting to, you know, smear the idea, but really it's super normal. We already have things like this in place.
Right.
It's just now we're saying, I can't turn my carton of eggs into, you know, a $12 carton of eggs when it used to be like a $3 or $4 carton of eggs.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and especially a lot of that comes down. The rent thing makes sense just overall, and that's been the last 20-something years. People have been doing that because you can't, because a lot of times what would happen is you'd get these big real estate companies would buy up a bunch of stuff, or banks would buy up a bunch of property, and what they do is then they'd be like, okay, well, we want to gentrify the area or make it more expensive so we can profit more, but we got to drive off all the middle or lower income people first. So we're going to just jack up the rent to get rid of them. Right. This is kind of a similar situation in the sense of we're not typically going to just price gouge. But if there's a crisis and we can take advantage of that, now we're going to price gouge. Why? Because you're screwed. You're up against the wall. So, we're just going to take advantage of you at your low point. That's what this is about preventing. And that's just a great idea to putting caps on. But